I'm going to keep this intro short because we have a rousing conversation for you today. I'm joined by Lillian Story. She is a somatic movement practitioner and therapist. We're talking all about somatics, the process of going from an activated nervous system into a relaxed nervous system, learning through our bodies, how creating space and listening to and honoring the sensations and knowledge of our bodies creates self-nurturing and builds self-trust, the power of sharing and reframing the story of our personal journeys, and how we can do that through somatics, the inner child's role in participating in our evolution and coming into the wholeness of our experience so that we can expand, how somatics can aid us in our practices in daily life, and at the end, we do a wonderful, relaxing, guided exercise. So, you're going to want to stick around, and without further ado, enjoy. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I would love to introduce myself. So my name is Lillian, and I'm a somatic movement educator and therapist located in Brooklyn, New York. And I support other people in coming into a state of body listening and connection from within. And I work with both individuals and groups of people too.
Awesome. Do you want to explain what somatic movement and therapy is for anyone listening that doesn't know?
Yes, that is such a good place to start because the word somatics sort of floats around in many different spaces and has a lot of different orientations and frameworks, which is really exciting that it's broad, but it definitely has some basic tenets and philosophies that is really important to name. So I always like to start with the root word of somatics, which is soma, and it's a Greek root word, and it means living body. And so the field of somatics is interested in working with and studying the living body. And putting the word living in front of body is a really important distinction because it really names the foundation that we are already whole. So we're coming into the wholeness of ourselves. It includes our body, and it also includes everything else that makes us have a living experience. So it includes our perception, our thoughts, our consciousness, whatever this thing is. Of course, our physical bodies and all of the felt sensations that come along with our physical bodies. So it's really interested in looking at the wholeness, particularly from a subjective perspective, a subjective point of view. So it's really orientation of self-learning and going in and deriving information from within one's own experience.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. I have been really focused on, and we touched on in one of our last episodes when I spoke to a dancer, my dance professor from college, this idea of embodiment and what it means to be present in our wholeness. And part of that is, like you just said, that I think first it's like the acknowledgement of the living body. And I love that you put living before body, because I think I'm sure a lot of people would relate to this in the sense that sometimes, and even, I don't really know where it might come from. Maybe it has to do with, how we speak about it. But we have such a disconnect, I think, between our body and our mind. For me, a great example is when I had an eating disorder. There was such separation between my living body and honoring all of those elements and what was going on in my mind.
Right.
And I think that, to whatever degree people can relate to that, I think a lot of people can relate to the fact that I have this body and I know I'm supposed to care for it, but without a framework like somatics that allows us to understand our interconnection and our embodiment, then I think we struggle.
Yeah, for sure. We're kind of lost in the woods here, unfortunately, because I think we've been brought up in a culture, at least I'm speaking from my experience,
right,
born and raised in New York, where we are part of a disembodied culture and framework. And you can trace it back to, many points in history, but the one point that comes to mind is this development of the philosophy of dualism.
Yes.
That, I think, therefore I am. And so this sort of disconnection and perhaps some overemphasis on and over attentiveness on our mind and that experience of ourselves, of our thoughts and our cognition and all of that stuff. And then that giving way into this huge exploration of math and sciences, which is incredible, and at the same time, within that framework, we're also ignoring a more subjective and direct lived experience through our bodies. And so somatics did come out of, as well, from the sort of counter philosophy of phenomenology.
Yeah.
Edmund or I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, was sort of like, wait a second, that can't be the whole story.
Right.
There is more to my experience than just my head. And so anyway, looking back at kind of where that came from, that influence into our culture now, and totally connecting back to what you're saying about, your own experience with eating disorder, and I'm sure anyone can relate to any area of disembodiment where it's like, you know that there's something else going on and we just don't necessarily have the resources to come into that connection. And what I do really love, and I try to lean into, this is something that my teacher said to me one time. I was really struggling hard. This was back in grad school. So of course I was, I was doing a lot of work and I was writing a paper and I was gathering information, and I went to her and I was like, Mary, I don't know how this all connects. I need to make this connection to make it make sense. And she slowed me down a bit and she said, well, what if the connections are already there? And all you need to do is allow the space to listen and to see the connection. And that is also one of the basic tenets of a somatic practice, is that the good news is that we're already whole. We already, mind and body are already integrated. They're already one thing. And so it is a process of remembering, and sort of unveiling and coming into a place of receptivity to be able to see that those connections already exist. And so in that way, there's a little less effort. It's more about being in that space rather than doing anything to make those connections happen, because we're already whole.
I love that. I think that's such a sigh of relief for people to hear. And I'm sure that was a sigh of relief for you to hear.
Yes. Yeah, I was like, oh, wow, I don't have to work that hard. Awesome. I can relax. Great. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do more of that.
Totally. And I think that some of my first, experiences, and I love that emphasis of giving space is such an integral part of remembering that connection, because for me, when I started a yoga practice when I was in high school, early high school, and I couldn't have told you, I couldn't have verbalized it in this way, but in giving time and giving space, that practice was helping me to tap into that already connected existence within myself. And even to acknowledge, and I think now that I'm more cognizant of it, which I think is the awareness piece is so helpful, because once we learn about it, then we can really, I think, use our minds as a tool to help us remember and to give that space and time and feel what it is to be whole again.
Yeah. Yeah, you bring up a really important point of this relationship between mind and body, right? Which, we already know is whole and integrated, and it's just that we don't know about it yet, mm-hmm. Which is where the awareness piece comes in.
Right.
And what's really helpful is to have a framework to have a structure, right? Either a structure of knowledge, a set of facts, or a practice like yoga that takes us through a sequencing mm-hmm. of postures and form. And, this is where practice comes in, and also ritual, holding a container of space, with enough context where our minds can go, oh, okay, this is what's happening. I get it. And then we can actually start to relax. Our minds start to relax a little bit because we feel secure.
Yeah.
Okay, yoga, it's, this will help me. Like all the books that I read say that yoga will help me. And, for whatever reasons, we might come to understand this through our minds. And then the direct experience of our engaging in the process and in the practice with and through our bodies, it's almost as if this process it can happen without us, because this is what our bodies are always doing. It's part of our nature, is to come to a place of homeostasis. Mm-hmm. This is what we're finding balance around, and our bodies are constantly working and moving toward that center of balance and homeostasis. And so, yeah, I love this naming of giving space and then relaxing into that space. And part of my experience of learning about somatics, and particularly all these different methods, was through grad school. I went to a program for 2 years, and I like to tell people, relay this story, that literally for the first year of the program, I would just fall asleep on the floor. It was a lot. It was a lot of experiential work, meaning that, we would have discussions, we'd have material that we would read on our own, but then when we came together in a group and in community, we were doing direct physical body practices, mm-hmm. a lot of which were very slow and working with subtle movement and working with sound and breath and being really low down to the ground. And my nervous system at that time was so activated. I was a dancer, working, living in New York City,
right,
doing the whole rat race thing, trying to make a few bucks to pay my rent, and
right.
then, had this. It did feel like something else came in, that, a voice came in that said, I'm not balanced. Something isn't right here. And I found myself in the studio for 2 years, working with my body and slowing down. And it was really hard. It was really hard. I felt a lot of guilt and shame around, we would go into these practices and explorations, and within 10 minutes I would just fall asleep. And I'd wake up 20 minutes later and be like, oh no, I missed the whole thing. Like, I missed it. and of course my teacher was very gracious and supportive, and really emphasized that this is what my body needed to do. This is what, and that was, I didn't realize it at the time, but resting and letting my body fall asleep and come in and out of conscious awareness like that for hours and hours on time was the first moments of unwinding and unraveling, of releasing enough to then allow myself to come back to a state of homeostasis and equilibrium. And eventually I stopped falling asleep and I was able to tune into, with my awareness, more subtle sensations and give myself a little bit more time to be in my body. But to your point, exactly, of just giving space and resting into that space is profound, is really profound.
Yeah, that's so, first of all, it's so not to make light of your experience because I totally relate to it. And in that relation, it's so funny that you were falling asleep because I can't tell you how many times I've fallen asleep during Shavasana. And like my yoga teachers come over to me and be like, Lydia.
Totally. Yes. You're not the only one, my friend. Most people pass out within a minute.
But it's so, I think that's so true because those times when I was doing that, my nervous system was in such a heightened state of high alert. And I think meditation is a great example of this as well. And I think a lot of people can relate to, especially with guided meditations, falling asleep.
Yeah.
You know, I love how you frame it too, that you're not, because I used to feel that way too, like I'm missing something, I'm doing something wrong.
Yeah.
But rest is such an important part of that homeostasis. And I feel like there are more conversations about it going on now, just about how this mentality, especially in New York, especially in cities, is work harder, do more, be quicker, faster, stronger. We need to rest. We need to be slow. And I think something like somatics is such a great entry point for that if someone doesn't know where to start or how to slow down.
Yes. Yeah, of course. It's really, slowing down is really the first step. It's the first step. And it's actually one of the more challenging things to do, to slow down enough and then to bring awareness and attention to physical body sensation, to inner experience. And what happens, especially at first, or at any given point in time, is when we slow down and bring attention inward, we start to notice amplification, right? And this is where it gets tough, because when we start to feel an amplification of sensation, most of the time our brains are wired to feel into pain and into discomfort, right?
Yeah.
So oftentimes when we come into our bodies, we feel really uncomfortable, and there's so many responses and reactions that we have. One of them being falling asleep, that falling asleep as in that being in my body right now is a little bit too much. It's overwhelming my system. It's a little too much too fast. So I'm going to fall asleep. And that's not a bad thing. Another thing my teacher would say with encouragement, she'd say, yes, well, your body needs to rest. That's okay. Your body needs to fall asleep. And eventually, the goal is to stay awake. The goal is to stay awake to your experience.
Yeah.
And so as opposed to, coming inside, feeling probably more sensation than you're used to then be able to develop the inner awareness and also the tolerance to be able to stay awake and hold that space for yourself without running away and just being there. So that, I would say, is almost like the second step. If you want to, in a hierarchical kind of way, or step by step, it's like, first you got to slow down, give some space, and then begin to develop awareness and hold your experience. And then that's really where the learning starts to happen.
Mm-hmm. How would you describe that learning?
Wow. Great question.
Thank you.
Yes, I mean, I'll name my process because I can't really know anyone else's direct experience but my own. My learning process, like I said, it's a lot about slowing down and coming into feeling sensation and then coming into a place of coming underneath what I think I know. What I mean by that is we live in a place usually of we've already created interpretation and meaning and story and judgment around our own experience. And so by slowing down and feeling into my body, I can get underneath that and starting to name simply the sensations and simply the feelings without any interpretation or meaning making or judgment or story. And so when I get underneath that place, I can then open up the opportunity for other options. So I may start to notice an association. I'll give an example. I know this is a little abstract. Let's say I come into my body and my stomach feels a little queasy. Let's say my stomach feels like there's a million butterflies in it. My stomach feels an upward motion of contraction coming up to my throat, right? Feeling a little sick. And so when I stay with that feeling, I can notice an interpretation that I've already associated with that feeling. And I say, I'm nervous. I'm nervous. I feel those butterflies in my stomach. I feel like I'm going to be sick. That means that I'm nervous. So, yes, and there can be more options and more different or a variety of interpretations to the feeling. So if I get underneath that interpretation of nervousness, I can start to, first of all, feel into what I need to maybe soothe a discomfort, an uncomfortable sensation. I ask myself what I need. And perhaps my hands come to my belly and I need a little bit of pressure. I need some holding. I need to feel the outside of my body. I need to feel a sense of containment and container. Then I can start to evolve that meaning of before I said, oh, I'm nervous. Now I can start to say, well, I really need to be held. I really care about what this other person thinks of me. I really care about how I perform at my job today. I really want to live up to my own standards, and those standards are because I value what I do so much, and I value these things about myself. So you can see sort of a process to take you through as a way that I have come in to use awareness of felt sensation to then reimagine, reinterpret, and come into a more whole perception of myself, and at the same time be able to serve myself, self-resource, give myself what I need.
Yes. That's a beautiful example. To add to that, because as you said that, I was thinking about how in the process, I think, for me, of coming back into my body, I can recognize, and I hold a specific example of this because it also marked, I think, a big turning point in my life recently, which was that last December, I had gotten dinner with a very old friend of mine from what feels like lifetimes ago. And as we sat there at dinner, I had a sensation in my stomach, and I named it as excitement. But I think, in retrospect, had I had a framework and a practice already established, which would have given me space to say after that, when I was home and safe and calm, I could have inquired more into that. And I think I would have been able to honor what that sensation was in a way that would have built self-trust. Because I think it's so easy. And I think your example too. It's so easy for us to leave it at what we first might experience or assign. This is nervousness. But as you said, when you give it space and when you explore it more, you can say, well, it's nervousness because I'm excited and because I want to perform up to my standards and because I really care about this. And in doing so, you breathe care. And like you said, you're able to self-nurture. And that's really powerful. And that continual practice, I think, is what builds trust within ourselves, that we can fully show up for ourselves. And I think that that is something I think a lot of people are beginning to wake up to, especially with COVID and especially having all this space. We can start to begin to see the ways in which we, from the spectrum of betraying ourselves to the spectrum of just simply not fully honoring our inner knowing.
Yeah, I'm so moved by this connection of trust, self-trust, through self-nourishment. In my experience, that's been a huge part of my journey. And, you know, it's always a process. We're always growing and evolving. However, there have been some really challenging moments in my life personally where my emotional experience demanded and required my full attention, that there was really nothing else I could do but be in what I'm referring to as my process and state of grief. There was a lot of change happening in my life through a relationship ending and moving and jobs changing and, you know, just getting a little bit older and perspectives changing and shifting my identity. And so there was a lot of grief that came up that really was so full-bodied that I had to slow down because I felt like I couldn't do anything else. It really required all of my attention. And while that experience was really intense and hard, I had to use these resources and tools that I had, that we all have inside of ourselves, to be able to self-nurture and hold myself and hold space and then relearn, go through that process of relearning. And now it feels, again, it's always a process, but it does feel like I reached a new point of arrival where now I can say to myself, yeah, I can handle this. I can handle going through a really big transformation. I can handle, you know, leaving a relationship that doesn't serve me anymore. I can handle shifting my career. I can handle developing a new relationship to my family, because now I have the trust and growing confidence that as life moves on and as I'm presented with more and new challenges, that I can do it. And that's huge. That is huge when it comes to developing a more intimate relationship with yourself, just knowing yourself better so that you can then move through life perhaps with more fluidity.
100%. 100%. And from that point, too, of homeostasis, because homeostasis, I think, you know, one thing I like to push back when I hear peace, to me, is very fluid. And it's not a hardcore landing place. But I think I love this image. One of my absolute favorite therapists gave me this image and it's stuck with me. A lotus flower on the water. No matter what the water is doing, the lotus flower can float. So if it's super wavy, it can still be on top of the waves. And if it's calm, it stays calm. But, and if we are the lotus flower in this image, if there's something on the lotus flower that's making it unbalanced or making it tilt, it's going to fall into that water. So if the water is perhaps the chaos of life, the fluidity of life that can be both beautiful and horrible to deal with, when we have that state of homeostasis, it doesn't necessarily matter what's going on the water. We can, like you said, we can deal with it.
I love that image. Even if you're speaking to this image, I feel a sense in me of a bit of sway through my spine and these like long roots, like skinny, long, wet roots going down into the mud, like beneath the water too. So that is such a rich image. And I'm inspired to offer another.
Please.
Because I love this. I love that you brought this up. Because stillness is never still.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's no such thing as complete stillness. Stillness means stasis, which means death, right? So when something is still, when a living thing is still, it is no longer living. So if we're referring to a living phenomena such as ourselves and our bodies, I love the example because it's so direct. I mean, if you were to stand up right now and balance on one foot, let's say you're in a yoga class, or even whoever's listening now, you can go ahead and try it. Stand up, shift your weight onto one foot. And though we are in a relative place of balance and stillness, you can start to notice all of the subtle movement that needs to happen for us to maintain that balance. So you'll start to feel those little tremors in your ankle and in your leg, and your ribs start to kind of shift side to side to find balance. And there's never a moment you are not still. Even if it feels that way, you're still breathing too. And that breath is really important to maintaining balance over that leg. So our bodies are a good example of that. We're doing that all the time. We're never completely still. And I just find that there's so much depth in noticing the subtlety of movement, orienting back to center, but never arriving at center.
I love that. I love that.
It's kind of fun, right? It's a good experiment too. Just down on one.
Totally. And notice. That maybe is a good point to just kind of, how did you what is your story in terms of coming into somatics? Because I know when we spoke first, you said, in short, through dance, you arrived here. And I think, that story, I'm excited because I think it's, in a way, it's such a great example of that longer journey to those subtleties and to that subtle movement.
Yeah, for sure. And I would like to take it back a little bit further in my personal history of even what led me to dance as well. It does feel like really a lot of experiences in my life have ushered me into the field of somatics and what I do now. So I grew up as a competitive gymnast, and it was a very intense practice. And so I was really trained to be in my body in a very specific way at a very young age. And it had many benefits, and it also had a lot of things that I needed to rewire as I got older. But I learned at a very young age that the power of my own bodily experience, and to be able to execute the kind of movement that I had to do, it required a level of focus and concentration so quickly. Talk about mind-body connection, that like those two things had to come together really quickly to be able to do the things that I had to do. And so that training process was really intense and informed the way that I was in relationship with my body. As time moved on, a lot started happening. I started to go through puberty. I got a little bit older, right? So my body was changing, and so I ended up quitting gymnastics and leaning more into dance. And dance has always been in my family because my mother is a dancer, and she's still a dancer. She dances every single day. I grew up in a house where there's, images of dancers everywhere. So it was familiar, and it was something that I took refuge in. When this huge practice of gymnastics sort of ended in my life, I felt very lost, and it was a very confusing age as well, because I didn't really know myself, and I was coming into my own identity. And so leaning into dance gave me the permission to have more fluid expression of myself and to learn about my emotionality and the way that I can move through the world and express myself in so many different ways. And it was a real sigh of relief to go from a practice that was oriented around perfection. I mean, in gymnastics, you're literally trying to get a 10.0, right?
Right.
So every is on a point system. You're trying to reach this level of perfection that doesn't exist. No one gets a 10.0. So it's this constant grasping for an external validation of your movement and your form. And so coming into dance, and I chose to end up doing more lyrical and contemporary and modern. As I got older, I started doing more experimental forms of movement, which really encouraged non-perfection, and that the perfection is the non-perfection, and that there's not just one way to be in your body or to express yourself. And so that, as I got into college, that started to commingle with my studies and interest in Buddhism and more Eastern philosophy. I met a teacher, so one of my primary dance teachers in her modern class. She was working with somatic elements. We didn't speak directly to somatics, but we had guests come in that did some body-mind centering and some authentic movement practices. And she was and is a Buddhist herself, and so she brought in some of that framework into the classroom. So we would explore things like moving with our chakra system and tuning into different energy centers, as well as moving with the natural elements, the qualitatively embodying earth and water and fire and air and ether. And so that, to me, really took dance into a whole new embodied form for me. Whereas for a while, I was still mostly, while I was enjoying the expression of myself, I also still wanted to look a certain way and perform a certain way. And there is still something to be said about that. I mean, dance is an art form, and so that is important to a certain degree. I started to shift a little bit more into my own direct experience and relaxed a little bit more around the way that I looked and came more into how I felt in my movement. And then that took me into yoga and meditation. I traveled to India in college and then came back, and I came to New York City to dance and was auditioning and performing and just feeling out what it even means to be a professional dancer in New York City and discovering that world really for the first time. And coming up against a lot of walls for myself, of not feeling nourished in the way that I had experienced before in college. And so I had to start making, understand what that meant. It's like, well, what do I really need? What does dance actually give me? What am I actually seeking through movement? And I started to realize that it was connection and community, and that I felt so held in a creative and communal space in college. And then to go into the dance industry as it is in New York City, that to me was challenging, as it is for a lot of people. And that's not to say, I mean, there are so many beautiful pockets of community within that world. I personally had a difficult time finding my people and finding my practice and finding the person or the people that I wanted to work with. And so with a little bit of being a bit disheartened and with some grief around that, I started to shift into somatics, and that's when I decided to go to grad school and orient myself onto this path of studying.
Beautiful. I love hearing people's journeys into whatever this space is that we all sort of overlap in, because it's just so, for me, it's so inspiring, and I relate to it so much because it really is such a long, it's a process, it's a long journey. And, I'm of the mindset and ascription to everything happens for a reason, and everything leads us to the point we are at today. For me, that helps me make meaning out of some really horrible experiences I've had. And I think it's really like every time I hear someone's story, I am just telling stories. We relate to each other so much better. And I think there's so much medicine in that because it brings us closer. We can hear someone's experience that I might come across this podcast episode and I might say somatics. Like, what? I can't relate to that at all. But I hear your journey, and now for some reason I see myself in you. And I think that's so beautiful, and there's absolutely space for that in this world today.
Yes, for sure. And I even feel the need to thank you for asking me my story and having me share, because it really is sort of an edge for me right now of releasing my story out into the world and everything that comes along with it. That there's, there are enough people, that there are going to be people that resonate with my story, and that I resonate with other people's story. And like you said, it's medicine and it's powerful. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We see ourselves in others, and we are mirrors to one another. So yeah, thank you for that question. I'm definitely working on that for myself, of expressing myself in that way from my own personal story and personal history, because it's vulnerable too.
It is. And, I'm honored to be able to help you share that and to hold space to hear it, because I totally relate to where you're at right now. And I think that even with this podcast, I've slowly dazzled in bits and bops from my story, but even with this, I've kind of thought about it, and I like to hold the long space for it. Slowly it will come out through discussions, and I think that, that's another way to go about it. Yeah, it's medicine. It's really medicine.
I love that. Hold the long space. As you said that, I completely relaxed. I was like, oh, yeah, it doesn't all have to happen right now. Hold the long space.
I love it. Yeah, because there's twofold, and I absolutely encourage anyone listening who hasn't done this before. First of all, think about the story of your life. And, it could be helpful for you to write it out, to talk it out. And I think when we when we think about that and when we get the opportunities, especially, I mean, whether it's sharing it with another person or whether it's reframing it for ourselves, you know, our mind runs lots and lots of stories about macro and micro experiences we've had. But for me, I've found that when I, in a sense, rewrite my story to mirror where I am at today, and in a sense, it's, you know, and more a narrative of like everything happened for a reason, but it's also really empowered. I can speak about things that happened that are painful, and I can reassign meaning and empowerment to them. And I think that's such a great exercise for anyone who feels a sense of disempowerment by their story, because it's I don't know if you're familiar with Joe Rogan at all. It's a little clip from Joe Rogan. He talks about, and it's in a sense, but you are the main character of your story. So in the hero's arc of the journey, we should be leaning towards coming out heroic. And I think part of that for me was looking back on my experiences and being able to reframe them in a sense that put me where I am for where I'm going.
Yes, yes. I love this sort of going back into your personal history and reflection, and again coming to a place of holding space, right? Slowing down enough to reflect and to come into a place of, again, this process of reinterpreting. And of course, from a somatic orientation, I'm going to give another, maybe a more playful exercise. Of course, you can journal, you can meditate, but you can also move. You can move with the story of your life. This can be something that you try on, and almost as if you're embodying the character of yourself as you perceive yourself as 2 years old, as 5 years old, as 10 years old, and, you know, kind of cherry pick these moments in your life that you remember. And they don't even have to be a specific memory. They can be just sort of a felt sense memory of that time in your life, and to spend a little bit of time feeling into that, and then allowing some sort of expression to start to emerge from your body as a way to integrate that memory from, you know, what it perceivably how it was then to how you are now. So you're kind of bringing that together through embodiment and through felt sensation, and that way we can get quite deep in the process of rewriting our story, right? So taking it from a bottom-up experience rather than top-down. And what I mean by that is, you know, top-down generally refers to of the mind space coming to your body or into some sort of meaning. Bottom-up is referring to a place of sensorial experience, direct experience, and then coming up through into now a place of meaning. So that's just an offering of exploring ways to rewrite your story.
I love that.
Dance, put on music from your childhood, you know, like, and you can go through anything and everything that you need to be in that rewriting process. So maybe grief comes up, maybe a familiar sense of love or childhood joy comes up, right? So you can start to meet and integrate these parts of yourself to who and what you are now in this moment.
I love that. I will absolutely do that. I think that's such a helpful offering, and it goes so much deeper. I'm blown away. I lost what I had to say.
That's okay. Honestly, that sounds like fun. I might do it too. We could have this call. I was biking the other day, and I was imagining a dance, like myself dancing through the story of my life in almost toe style, thing where, affectively different expressions start to emerge over, let's say, a 10-year period as a process of reflection. So anyway, that's where that inspiration came from, because it was already floating in my head. I was like, to dance the story of one's life. How powerful.
How powerful. That's so powerful and so beautiful. I remember what I was going to say, which is that, a lot of what is sprinkled in with Reself, especially in some of the other workshops that exist that weren't in beta for the framework, is about a connection with the inner child. And I heard yesterday, I was listening to another podcast, and I heard that, and I loved it because I really resonate with the image, that inside of us all is a frozen child, in the sense of whatever, and it totally brought me right into somatics, because whatever, again, as children, if we're not taught how to release emotions, how to, the frameworks that we're raised in, if they don't include these things, in a sense, I'll speak from my experience, like, I can remember a handful of times from my childhood that I froze because I didn't know what to do with that emotion. I didn't know how to release it. I didn't know, it felt bigger than me. And I'm sure a lot of kids can relate to that sort of sensation. And I think when we're looking at dancing through our lives and what it is to embody different experiences throughout our life, that is something so powerful in, I think, the freeing of the inner child, because we are still that person. We still, and even from my own experience, I land here, I'm 23 years old, and as I start to figure out outside of college what it is to be a quote unquote adult, and what my ideas were as a child, as I revisit them, there feels to be a gap that has to be bridged in some sense. And for me, I never want to betray that inner child. Because I also think that for me is where self-trust comes from, as well as honoring the needs of the inner child, even if it's 20 years later, 10 years later, and helping that child to melt those instances so that we can show up vulnerably, so that we can show up wholly embodied and authentic, and in a sense not care if people don't align with it.
Yeah. I love this journey into the inner child, and I've heard some rhetoric around this process of reparenting.
Yeah.
Reparenting oneself, which is not to say that whoever raised us didn't do a good job. I think it's just a fact of life, that it's part of growing up, that we do live in societies that have a specific set of cultural rules and norms, and it's just the way that we develop and learn to come into ourselves, into our identity, into our personalities within certain frameworks, some which are supportive and others which are not. And so I love this discussion around the parts of us that froze, right? That parts of us froze in time. You could call that a trauma response if we didn't feel safe or held, or when something happened a little bit too much too fast, where we weren't at a developmental stage where we could even feel or fully understand what was happening. This is what we do. We freeze. It's part of the nature of our nervous system. And it does feel that the evolution into adulthood and the way that we are linearly moving through time, that there is a process of going back, right? Like reparenting, like remembering, regathering this stuff
Yes.
that kind of stuck along the way. And I believe that is just the nature of how we evolve as humans. And there's a way that we can participate in that. And that to me is really exciting. So actually, we do have the ability to repattern and rewire these conditions of ourselves. And some people don't really get to that place in their lives, which is fine, because perhaps they don't have the resources to be able to do that kind of self-growth. But I would encourage everyone and anyone who has the resource, who feels safe enough to come into their body and their experience, to seek support from community, from a teacher, to participate in that process of self-evolution, because in this way we can really come into the wholeness of our experience and not only be whole, but also now expand and grow.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that came up for me as we've been speaking, I think, and even in that sense, if we think about certain experiences, micro and macro, throughout our day and throughout our lives, that we haven't given time or space to process. That is something that one of the Reself beta testers highlighted, and I absolutely resonate with it, because this idea of, sitting down even at the end of a day and just processing, or at the end of a week and processing, that's also an example of maintaining that fluidity.
Yeah, it comes through our practices, that we can start to, if we resonate with a certain kind of, let's say, self-reflective practice, and that's what practice is. It's something that you return to over and over and over again. And eventually the practice isn't a practice anymore. It's just something that you do. So there is a learning process when it comes to practice, that you can, over time, you start to notice the difference.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. How can somatics help us with that processing and reprocessing?
Yeah. I mean, I think we touched on this a lot, and so but it's really important to sort of drive home. Like, I will be saying this until the day that I die, because it's something that needs to be remembered and re-remembered over and over and over again. It's just simply coming back into your body and giving the space and time for you to start to feel physical sensation, start to understand inner experience as it comes to you in the form of feeling, story, image, thought, sensation. So be able to hold your entire self-experience. And in that way begins a whole learning process. And with that learning, we can now make decisions for ourselves that feel more aligned with our well-being. So it can start to translate into, how we treat ourselves in terms of what we think about ourselves, our self-perception, our self-identity, right? So starting to learn how to come into more alignment and loving alignment with our relationship with ourselves. And then that can start to translate into our relationships with other people, how we begin to come into dialogue and into shared space with other people. Working with our boundaries, what it is, when we know what we need, we can then communicate our needs to other people. And so, in this sense, I feel like at the end of the day and at the end of our lives, what we really want is to feel well and to be and to feel our lives in its fullest expression of vitality. And so we often get caught in the details which are really important, the details of our lives, of things that are going right and things that are going wrong and things that I want and things that, all of this stuff. And while those details are important, I think it's essential to get underneath that and go, oh, well, I really just want to feel well. I want to feel at peace with myself, and I want to feel full and really be the essence and quality of life.
Yes. Absolutely. And I think it's so helpful for you, for what you just said, that framework. Again, we can't hear it enough.
Yeah. Again and again, just coming back into your body. And of course, we've named some of the methods so far, but I just want to go over the methods again.
Please.
Which is feeling physical sensation, tracking, naming sensation that you're present to in your body. You can use authentic, expressive movement, start to sense into subtle movement, gross movement of your body, use of breath, and also touch, and also coming into relationship with your physical environment. So these are all methods to come into your body and into your experience.
Do you want to can we do a little exercise?
Yeah,
a practice?
Yeah, we'll do a brief practice, a little check-in, and we'll keep it brief, not only for the sake of time, but also as a demonstration that we can quite quickly drop into ourselves and our experience in our bodies, because time can feel limited when we have busy lives and a busy day. So we'll just spend about 5 minutes reorienting ourselves into our body. And so invite yourself to, first of all, just notice where you are right now. Notice what shape your body is taking. And if for any reason right away you notice any discomfort, invite yourself to come into a position that feels more comfortable and at ease. So you can be sitting, you can be lying down, you can be standing, you can be leaning on something. So starting to orient to comfort and ease by way of noticing contact. So start to feel where it is you are in contact with the ground or whatever material is underneath you and perhaps around you. And you can imagine your awareness almost like a butterfly. And let your awareness start to travel to different parts of your body. Let your awareness come to those meeting places between you and your environment. And as that awareness sort of flutters around, let it land for a moment. And when your awareness lands in a specific location or part of your body, notice any sensations that you might become present to. Notice if, as you bring attention to sensation, notice if the sensation starts to change or move in any way. Notice any impulse or desire for you to move in response to the sensation that you become aware of. See if you can come into your experience without any sort of judgment or interpretation. You can be exactly as you are in this moment. And simply feeling. Notice the sensorial landscape of your body. Any inner movements of pulse or breath, temperature, quality of weight. Letting your curiosity and desire to start to follow the feeling of these sensations. So orienting to pleasure and ease. And allowing this experience to flow. Let it move how it needs to move. Let yourself move how you need to move. So feel, follow, and flow. And in coming to a close with this exploration, you can take your time. If your eyes started to close, you can begin to slowly open your eyes. Come back into your space, both physically and also visually, so you can start to look around you. Maybe take a few deep breaths or a familiar stretch that you might need, or a yawn. And just notice how you might feel now, and invite yourself to have that experience inform whatever it is you're about ready to do next with your day.
That was amazing.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I hope that was nourishing and at least interesting.
Yes. So it's so great. I love the butterfly image.
I love it too, because it feels very, it's a good image that reminds me of my own mind, this sort of fluttering from place to place. And yeah, with the butterfly, it gives a little bit more space and lightness, lightheartedness to kind of, travel around your experience.
Absolutely. I have a question for you, which is, in your newsletter questionnaire, you ask, what type of water are you?
Yes, I meant to say I saw your reply and loved it.
I want to know, first of all, I love that. I love that question. I was so taken aback. I was like, what kind of water am I? What kind of water are you, Lillian?
Oh, what kind of water am I? I love this question too, because it changes. At least this is my intention, is that it's sort of moment to moment. Thank you for asking. Let me feel into that for a second. I am a river that is traveling to the ocean. I'd say I'm a river that's quite close to the source.
I love
Powerful flow to center.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Where can people find you? What offerings do you have on deck for people as resources right now?
Yeah. So you can find me on Instagram. I am at SomaLove Therapy. So it's SomaLove is one word _ therapy. And my website is somalovetherapy.com. And I'm really excited to be working on a project this year called Elemental Body. And my main intention, I have a few intentions. One is to start to come into community with other people who are interested in somatic work. And then also for me to be in my own practice. And so what Elemental Body is, it's I'll be publishing somatic practices that orient around the natural elements all throughout this year. So I'm taking my time with it, but I'm happy to announce that the first element that I'm working with is earth, and those meditations, I have 3 free somatic meditations on my website for you to try out and try on. It's all oriented around earth and grounding, and I am now shifting into the next element, which is water, which I'm very excited about as well. So alongside these online offerings that I'll be sprinkling out into the world throughout this year, some will be free, some will be paid online offerings, which is, practice packets that I'll be oriented around different subjects. And then I'm also available for one-on-one sessions. It's one of the things that I really love to do most, is come into relationship with another person, to hold space for some co-creation and some somatic guidance. So if any or all of that piques anyone's interest, I am available and really interested in connecting.
Beautiful. All of those links to everything will be in the show notes. I have been doing the earth practice. I loved the ground one. I think it can be so elementary, but lie down on the floor. That is, even, we spoke about inner child. I loved being on the floor as a child. I loved lying on the floor, sitting on the floor, rolling around on the floor, and it's so grounding.
Yeah, it's this thing that will always hold us, so it's this resource that can give us some containment, especially if we're feeling a little lost or disconnected or disembodied or ungrounded. Just get down to the floor. That's the first step. Just lay down on the floor and see what happens. But very cool that you've been exploring the ground meditation.
Yes.
That particularly works with being close to the ground, and then movement prompts will invite you to press and roll and pour your weight and your body in relationship to the ground, and just noticing what happens for you in your experience. So that's a good one. I'll turn it on too. I'll turn it on too after a long day and do my meditation.
I love it. I love it. So thank you. And thank you for putting yourself out there and putting this out there and letting it be accessible to everyone, regardless of means. I think that's so, I have so much respect for that.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm so enlivened by this conversation and hoping to just connect with more people and get this work out into the world, because I think it's really important.
Yes, yes. Lillian, thank you so much for giving me your time and, like you said, for this enlivening conversation.
Thank you so much.
I hope everyone enjoyed this conversation as much as we did having it. You can find all of Lillian's links In the show notes, you can find links for Reself, Instagram, Pinterest, Tumblr in the show notes as well, along with the sign up for Reself newsletters and announcements so you can stay posted about launch. That's it for us. Have a beautiful week. Stay well. Go roll around on the floor. Bye, everybody.